I hope that after the coffee you are more revigorated, and now we're getting to the panel number 2. Panel 2 is called The Culture of Memory. So this is a general statement, but as I told you, the culture of memory is very important for the creation of nations, for the awareness, for the identity of a multi-ethnic country as Moldova is. So it is important. It is important that in such a process of creation of the state and of the nation, to refer to the culture of memory. Cultures of memory. I don't want to lecture you about it, but I'm Gerald Volkmer. I come from the Federal Institute for Culture and History of Eastern Europe, from Oldenburg, and we advise the state ministers, state secretaries regarding the history and culture of Eastern European countries. And I'm responsible for legal matters and history. This is what I actually studied. I'm so happy that we have now a very competent panel, and I'm honored to introduce it to you. In the first part of the panel, we will hear Dumitru, followed by a commentary by Mariana Hausleitner, and without any break, we'll get to the second part of the panel, where Andrei Cușco will talk, followed by Sergiu Musteață. Okay, let's get to the first part. Give the floor to Dumitru. Dumitru is historian, and she is at the Ion Rațiu department from Georgetown University from the United States of America, and her research is focused on Holocaust in Europe, the politics of nationalities, and anti-Semitism in Soviet Union, and the area of late Stalinism and post-Soviet history in the Soviet Union. She published her second book on relevant topic for us, the state anti-Semitism and collaboration in the Holocaust, borderlands, Romania and Soviet Union in 2016. So she also writes in genocide research. She does research in this area. So I read it carefully so that the interpreters have the time to interpret it. So I'll ask the speakers to not to speak too fast. Go ahead, ma'am. I'm happy to be back home. It is always a big pleasure to be here in Chișinău with my friends and colleagues. I'd like to thank organizers for this opportunity to allow me to be back and to be part of this conference. I will continue in English so that it is easier for our colleagues from Germany and to be more accurate in what I'm going to say. I understand that I have to be short and to the point.
So what I will be talking here is like I will be a brief kind of overview of what's happening with the memory of the Holocaust in the Republic of Moldova, and this is kind of the focus, understandably, because I am a historian of the Holocaust, so that's what I know best, that's what I do. At the same time, as I will explain here, there is another very big history that is the history here in this country, in this university as well, that makes the pages of history that are researched and taught in this country, and also that's the history of victims of Stalinism especially. So I will be comparing a little bit how Holocaust is commemorated and taught and researched, or not taught and researched, compared to also the history of victimhood of Stalinism. So, just a brief background for those who are too young to remember what happened since the independence of the Republic of Moldova. What I'm saying here, that despite all different political forces coming and living and changing tracks in this country, what is happening at the level of historical discourse, I think it would be fair to be characterized as something that a nationalistic interpretation of history, and I mean nationalistic in sense of ethnic Moldovan / Romanian centric type of history being dominant among the professional historians, and also being dominant among the intellectual elites of this country. And I don't have to explain what it comes with, but the usual thing with the nationalistic, whatever it could be, like any country you take it, it's usually the nation is the good nation and the other is not so good, or kind of, it depends, usually neighbors, minorities, they are the others, and so this type of history, as we well know and have seen it in many other countries, and probably our trajectory is best compared to the trajectory of history study and research in Ukraine, for example, in the Baltic states, doesn't allow for too many nuances, but definitely requests some kind of selective history. A history that puts in good light us, and omitting the history that puts us in a bad light. It's exactly what Svetlana Sveika talked about before. And actually the period when it was a concerted challenge of this kind of narrative was the period when the Communist Party was in government here. So they came with this like, very much refurbished pro-Soviet type of narrative, and that had an impact also on the type of history that they were trying to impose on the society and school and in research areas, but with a limited impact. Interestingly, they embraced the study of the Holocaust, and they were trying to implement it with the tools that they had in their hands, meaning ministries and school education. So that was the period when state institutions kind of promoted that kind of discourse. But it was a totally instrumentalized one, and for the same reason as why the nationalistically minded historians wanted to omit it, because it put the Romanians in bad light. It was for the same reasons that the Communist Party government and their supporters wanted to embrace it, because it put the Romanian government in bad light. So both sides were not happy with the Holocaust discourse. At the same time, what I want to make very clear is the role of international institutions, and I wanted especially here to put in light the OSCE, because the OSCE had an extraordinarily positive role in helping actually history education. They, I think, single-handedly came with the agenda. Of course, they worked with the Ministry of Education trying to promote a history education that's more inclusive, that's more tolerant, that also pays attention to minorities and to like various pages of history, not just the golden ones. So we do see that there is some kind of attention to the Holocaust even after the post-communist regime, and I call this phase the internationalization of the Holocaust memory and history. Interestingly, is how the authorities, the politicians speak about the Holocaust. So they are eager to commemorate it as an international event. They understand that that's the political correct way to commemorate Holocaust. So they also understand that this is what Europe does. So they're eager to, at least like at the surface, be part of this. But what we do see that even when they commemorate Holocaust, when they speak at the events, they always like, there is this silence about what Holocaust meant for the region. There is no speech about Antonescu. There is no speech about the Romanian government being the one who implemented the Holocaust. There is no speech, there is no detail about the specificity of the Holocaust on the ground. So it's this tragedy that happened in Europe. It's always like with these vague words about bad things happen to Jews, but somehow avoiding the local context. So that was this kind of middle ground that was. Well, since 2016, this process kind of speed up, and we do see that many events are happening in schools. We also see a different kind of intensity of discourse at the political level. Interestingly, since the war started in Ukraine, we do see again a renewed emphasis on the Holocaust commemoration in Moldova. And I don't know if it's just like an accident or not, but to give you an example, that this January, this year, you had already 255 events related to the Holocaust commemoration in Chișinău alone, which is a lot, like roundtables, discussions, presentations. So you see here Nicu Popescu, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Moldova. Interestingly, if you go to the site of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and you just like do Holocaust search, you'll see that at least like 8 articles about the Holocaust will pop up, including the speech of the minister. So what is very clear, like the way Holocaust is commemorated in this country is very much an agenda that comes as a reaction to an international audience, and especially to the European partners. I thought that I'll take a small case study, and I looked actually at 2 speeches that President Maia Sandu gave this year, one related to the Holocaust commemoration, and one related to the victims of Stalinism, commemoration of deportations. Because what I want to make clear is that you have these like 2 parallel agendas. So the commemoration of the Holocaust is something that is clearly embraced as a narrative that you have to have if you want to be European, and also as a way of like engaging with European partners. But you have an audience, and for your domestic audience, of course, the discourse about the victimhood of the Stalinist deportees, of the people who suffered, is the predominant narrative that you also have to embrace and put on display. So I looked, for me it was like very interesting to look at the wordings of the speech, and I could see that there was, when comparing the speeches, the real interesting elements were the following. So the President Maia Sandu basically said all right words what it means. Like, she probably ticked all boxes because she definitely spoke about the Holocaust as one of the darkest pages of history of humankind. Again, no specific details were mentioned about how Jews perished during the Holocaust in what is today Moldova. Nothing about the Romanian authorities or who were the perpetrators. She rightly said that called for collective effort to ensure, and I'm quoting, collective effort to ensure that hatred, bigotry, and prejudice do not take root again in Moldova society. So she also spoke that for our country, the tragedy of the Jewish people, of Roma, and others who suffered on this soil during the Holocaust is and will remain a deep wound. And so, speak up? Okay, yeah, sorry. Sure, yeah. So, and the Romanian citations, pentru țara noastră, tragedia poporului evreu, a romilor, a tuturor celorlalți care au suferit pe acest pământ în timpul Holocaustului, este și va fi întotdeauna o rană adâncă. So, and interestingly, she even has a sentence where very carefully asks for forgiveness from Jews, but without specifying what is this forgiveness for, you know, because like if you don't have any details, but those like who know what happened, the implication is something happened. So the forgiveness is there, but the information about like what are we asking for forgiveness is not quite clear. So, and no numbers, to kind of put it in more like succinct words, what's happening in this message. The message is correct. The message is basically a responsible message of a leader. At the same time, she is speaking as an outsider. She's speaking about something that happened to a community that's rightly recognized as part of our history. The words are very abstract, formal, so the style of them. So when we look at the speech that she gave about the victims of Stalinism, it's interestingly, it's a different type of emotional discourse. First of all, you do see that it's the words are very simple, the sentences are clear and short, and in a very accessible language. So this is how she started. And this morning, as I was coming to this event commemorating the victims of the largest deportation operations from our lands, I imagined what it was like to live in the world where such children, their families, the best people in society were loaded in trains. And so she carries on about, and then she specifies small children, pregnant women, the most prominent members of the community. And then she clearly places herself in the midst of this group. She is part of the group, which she was not in the previous discourse, because she said, we did not choose to be deported. No one asked us. We did not choose to be starved, killed, to be sent to war. Our people bled while others decided our fate. So, for her, according to the speech or speechwriter, I don't know, but like, as for many other Moldovans, the suffering of their own forefathers during the deportations definitely eclipses the death of the Jews during the Holocaust. And I thought it's very interesting to look briefly at what's happening in the field of professional historians, and probably the easiest way would be to look at what's happening at the Institute of History, which is basically the only institution in Moldova where research dedicate themselves exclusively to the study of the history. If you try to search for the term Holocaust, you'll find it only like once in the program of their PhD studies. No other events, publications, announcements would refer to the Holocaust. Of course, like victims of Stalin resonate more with Moldovan historians and public, I said. So the entire multitude of events, of research projects, of conferences. They're all dedicated to these kind of subjects. I gave you a couple of examples here: Memories from Gulag, Childhood in Gulag, The Martyr of the Union. So, The Martyr of the Union, for example, is a common project with the Divisional Trinitas of the Patriarchy of Romania, and they're looking at the case of a priest that is now they're going to be the main hero of this project, the Martyr of the Union. So what I want to say that per se, this kind of project, it's nothing wrong to have them to study and to commemorate victims of the Holocaust. But what is happening here, and what I want to point, is that there is a tendency of historians that basically, if put together, this kind of selective mission or focus puts the inhabitants of this land mostly as innocent and virtuous victims of others' atrocities. So I'm coming again to what Svetlana Suveyka said before, that indeed there is no meta-narrative that encourages contemporary Moldovans to reflect on their own historical mistakes or misdeeds or wrongdoings or crimes. So this kind of attitude, it's not conducive to think about oneself as a community and how to improve and how to grow as a community. I want to leave it really the glass is half full, half empty, because we do see progress at the level of politicians, at the level of schools. We do not see development among the professional historians. Hopefully will come, but at the same time, to my knowledge, there is no PhD research that is done on the Holocaust today in the Republic of Moldova. So I am still hopeful the seeds planted in schools will grow up in the future, but it would be good if this growth will be speeded somehow. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ja, vielen herzlichen Dank für diesen Impuls, der jetzt gleich kommentiert wird von Frau.
For this input, which will be commented by Hausleitner, Mariana Hausleitner. She studied history in Berlin, in München and Berlin. She worked in the 90s, so she became PhD on a topic about Bukovina in the pre-war period. She works at the Institute for German Culture and Southeastern Europe History at the University of München. She wrote a book about the Bessarabian Germans. She wrote a lot of publications, relevant publications for our topic, about specifically about the minorities from Eastern Europe, about Schwabs from the Danube, about the displacement from Bukovina, killings of European Jews. It's a book from 2018. In 2020, she wrote a book about the supporters of Jews, the supporters of the Jewish population from Romania and Bessarabia between 1940 and 1944. And she also wrote about Germans and Jews in Romania. Ms. Hausleitner will give us a comment about the culture of memory in Moldova and Romania, and she will present to us this politics of memory in 3 stages. My comment will not refer to everything that Ms. Dumitru said. We distributed our topics a bit. She she looked at what politicians do. If you live in Berlin, you don't have access to all the information. So I'll refer to what is public. I'll talk about 3 items about Holocaust. So discussions about Holocaust from the 90s, then 2000, and what is the current state of play. And I will compare Moldova with Romania, and where it is important, I will refer to what we've done in Germany. At the beginning of the 90s, very few historians from West were looking at the Holocaust in Romania. On the one hand, because there was no access to a lot of resources. And in 1991, so they clearly established that in Romania came second in terms of the Jews victims after Germany, and the researchers had access to the archives, but it was hard to get to the relevant materials in Romania. So in the 90s in Romania, it was very difficult to talk about this topic because there were 2 camps. The camp of those who started to make research. It was about the representatives of the Jewish community. They've written documents when the persecution started in 1940. It was about the Carol, the king, not just Antonescu, and because it happened prior to him. And then there were people who adored Antonescu, and it was those who had more political influence. So it's not only about the party which reached 30% of votes. Antonescu actually was loved and celebrated in the Senate. So we, those from the West, could not understand at all. But we, first of all, didn't know too many things about the communists. And then Antonescu is presented as a martyr, as the liberator of Bessarabia and northern Bukovina. But nothing was discussed about what he's done to the Jews. And then Gheorghe Buzatu strengthened this in Moldova. This was received quite well. Mr. Petrenko wrote books about Antonescu, where he doesn't at all talk about killings of Jews in that period, and it shows the period of Antonescu where he said that the population took advantage from this period, but I don't know how they took advantage and why they took advantage of that.
Und diese Bücher erschienen.
These books were published in 1997, 1998, so during a time frame where the documents and the reference literature were more and more accessible in Bucharest. So in the second part of my presentation, I would like to speak about what happens after 2001. Well, Romania has the pathway towards NATO. Iliescu, the president back then, promised that he will dedicate more attention to this topic. He will create a committee to analyze the victim of Holocaust, so that they can analyze and research and issue a final report. And in this final report, they can present the conclusions. And to call this final report sounded strange, but okay, let's take the conclusions, which mention that there were 280 to 300,000 victims from the Jewish community. Because prior to this report, report, it was only counted 11,000 victims. And that report was presented in the parliament with a lot of protests from the Great Romania Party. They made a lot of noise against this report, but ultimately they decided not to oppose the results of the report. And if we compare it to now, what it will be needed now in Romania to go through more research, well, I can say that in Romania there was created a Elie Wiesel Institute of Research who took this pathway of researching, publishing, and there are a lot of researchers that are conducting more research, and they reached the European level. So you can go through the same pathway, create an institute to do more research. Secondly, they published a textbook on the history of Jewish community and Holocaust. There was an attempt to introduce this chapter in the history textbooks, but from what I understood, it was unsuccessful. And 9 October was dedicated a day for commemoration. I don't know what you organized in Chișinău on the 9th of October. I didn't see a lot of events, but this is the day when the Antonescu declared the deportation. And I know that this is not known, that a big part of the population was affected, not a small population. And the commemoration should happen not only within the Jewish community. We think it should happen at the level of a state. Multiple districts should honor the fallen victims, should honor the members of the community, Jewish community that supported the victims. But we need the involvement of everyone, not only the politicians. And in Moldova, I have not seen this. And looking back in 2000s, there were very little research conducted and published, which we didn't understand. We saw the book of Sergiu. He published on the topic of Holocaust, but it was very hard to take this opinion because these are mainly Holocaust deniers, and they include a lot of polemics and a lot of biased opinion in their books. And then later we saw the publishment of Diana Dumitru Solonari about Chișinău, Mr. Shapiro's works, and finally they were translated into Romanian language, but I have not seen any commentary, any reviews of these publications. In the Romanian parliament, as I mentioned, there was a lot of reaction. For example, in 2016, the results of that final report were approved. They finally admitted that there was a Holocaust happening in Romania. But furthermore, I didn't see any follow-up. There was a plan in 2020 which includes more activities to research more the Holocaust, but that's it. No further activities. But for long term, this is important. Maybe it's important to scan all the historical documents to make them digital and accessible online. But what will happen with the teachers? Teachers that have to teach this topic, it's unclear. They don't have the teaching materials, and there are some courses, but they are optional, so it's not a mandatory subject, and I don't think that students and pupils will choose to select a course on Holocaust if it's not mandatory. But I think that these courses should be scheduled in the full curricula. These courses and these classes should be mandatory and should be seen as a long-term strategy. Okay, coming back to Germany, in the 70s, we started to research and to analyze and to study this topic about the student revolution in 1968, which started this approach, had a sort of a wrongful approach. We looked at the people that profited over this movement, and they didn't have a complex approach. But still, this revolution led to a transformation in this sense. And we discussed here about regional history and seeing the history regionally, this allowed for more specialists to participate, not only historians. For example, people might like to know more about the history of their street, of their region, of their city, and this led to unveiling a lot of history where more Jewish people lived, and this led to installation of historical signals and signs. And after this, you understand that this city was built up by a Jewish community which are no longer here because they were displaced. Also, this led to opening cultural museums. Why? Because many people came from the Soviet Union and they have an opportunity to see the exhibitions in the museums, and they have a chance to work in these museums because they know the history very well. I would not like to brag that we did a lot in Germany because the latest elections prove us otherwise. The younger generation voted for AfD, which is a party that promotes racism. It's very hard to understand what are they thinking, the supporters of such movement. It seems that what we tried to educate them in the past years was not enough. So the question is, how do we reach these young people? How do we reach more people so that we avoid concentration camps? So we have to not give a recipe for success, but I have some ideas, and maybe in Moldova you can implement these ideas. For example, I see that you work a lot with the victims of Stalinism, but why not integrate the concept of victims and integrate here the Jewish and Roma people? Because deported people were Jewish people. Among the deported were Jewish, Roma, socialists. In Bukovina, there's no research and no documents covering this topic, but certainly a big number of deported people were Jewish people. In 1941, many Jewish people were no longer there. Where did they go? They were deported. They were victims of Bolshevism, which existed previously to this. So I think we need to research this topic as well. Then let's not forget about the enablers and people that supported the Jewish families. This could be another interesting topic for research. This would be very easy to understand and to be taught to the young people that supported the Jewish family. Let's not forget that there were tens of people that were awarded for supporting and helping Jewish families, but we can speak more about this. We can research more. We can publish more how difficult and dangerous was for these people to support in secrecy the Jewish family, and yet they did it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation and for your details, and thank you for the commentary as well. These are very important topics related to cultures of memory. So we can have 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A, because let's not forget we have two other speakers that we need to give the floor to. So let's keep the questions to 5 to 10 minutes, please, but let's use the microphone. I have a short commentary, and I would like to verify a working hypothesis on how this situation can be explained. So, the first point, which would be good to explain, taking accountability of a collective phenomenon is very difficult at the social level. since we spoke about Moldova and how Moldova is taking accountability for the Holocaust and history, this is very difficult. We can look at Italy and Germany, how the accountability was accepted with great difficulty. There was always pointing fingers to others and not to the members of the society. But okay, let's move to Romania. What happened after the 90s? Taking accountability for collaborating with the communist system was very hard to obtain it. Now we see a resurgence of neo-fascism in many states, and we ask ourselves, how is this possible? Well, ideas and memories cannot be held into a black box, seal it and leave it in a deep cave where nobody has access to it. No, ideas flow into the society, and some ideas catch on. We work on combating these negative ideas, but this is very difficult, especially in the social media era. We cannot throw a opinion that the entire population is like this. Nobody is resilient to new ideas. We have to analyze and try to target different groups for a correct information. And now I would like to verify a hypothesis. So, taking accountability for Holocaust in Moldova, in Chișinău, this task is connected with the quasi-absence of the notion of Basarabia. Basarabia is the longest title given to this territory. We had the Gubernia Basarabia, then we had the province Basarabia of the Great Romania, and this title lingers. But now this doesn't exist. Even the Basarabian identity doesn't exist. Now everybody is Moldovan and the Republic of Moldova. And we have the Second World War. But who participated in the Second World War? The Great Romania, and the current Basarabia or current Republic of Moldova was non-existent. This is why it's very hard to take accountability if such a territory was not existing autonomous. Okay, we had Transnistria, but since there was no state, there's no legal accountability. You see, Romania was Great Romania, so they take accountability and they assume, they take responsibility for their participation in the Holocaust, and this is why they have more research. Okay, I see we are out of time. Thank you so much. Would you like to comment on this working hypothesis? I am Ion Dominica, the Institute for Cultural Researches, and let me speak about the Roma perspective, because I research the history of the Roma community. I would say that we need to analyze this phenomenon from multiple perspectives. From one hand, we should research and understand the Holocaust, and on the second hand, we should commemorate the victims and see the consequences. And when we research the Holocaust of the Roma population, we should not look only at the most recent one, but we should look at what happened between the wars and what happened during the world wars. Me, I was a student in the Soviet school, and when I was taught the history, nobody spoke about the Holocaust of the Roma population, because the approach was to see the victory, who was the victor of the Second World War. And if we speak about the Holocaust, we in a way stain the reputation of the victor. We stain that victorious end. And researching the Holocaust is like stopping us from seeing that victorious approach. But this means that we are not seeing the full picture. So how can we avoid bringing back the dark elements of that victorious war? Let's look at 1939 until 1951. During these years, we had multiple tragical events. But just like Madame Diana said, it's a selective history. presentation, not the entire history, and only after the 90s we started researching the victims of the communist system, and it's harder and harder to approach the victims of the Nazism and the victims of the Holocaust because it is more recent, and we have to ask ourselves what happened in 1945 here. Some historians tell us it was a liberation from one plague, but other historians speak about the dark times, what happened with the Jewish community, what happened with the Roma community. Here they stop. Me personally, I approached to tackle and to teach this history in 2 schools where we have displaced people from Ukraine, and I was invited to teach the history of a Roma community. The cultural part was accepted when we wanted to teach the history, and by the way we had 2 schools, one with a Russian language and one with Romanian language, and when we arrived at the topic of Holocaust, people were very frightened. They said, speak about the culture and speak about the victory, and when I tell them that the tragedy of the Second World War, the fact that a lot of civilians died more than the soldiers, if we look at the statistical data, this is the data, and this was a tragedy. We cannot speak about the Second World War only from the position of the victor. And that teacher said, no, if you want to teach the history of the Roma population, just speak about the culture and do not stain the victorious reputation that we have. If you go to Stefan Voda school, it's very interesting. You see in the yard the monument of the Russian soldier who liberated this territory. And then when you go into the school, the local city hall created the all the phases of deportation. So from 1940 until 1950, until 1960, including the young people that were forced to work in removing forests. So it's another approach. Look how many detailed details were about the deportation and victims of communism. And then when I asked her, where is a small poster about the victims of the Hitlerism and Nazism and the victims Jewish people and Roma people, and she said no, Antonescu was good. He wanted to send Roma people to Transnistria to work, not to die, but they died because they had not enough food. And then another myth was that the first wife of Antonescu was of Roma ethnicity, and out of spite he decided to persecute the Roma people. But these are legends. We should base ourselves on data. And to make it clear, in the Republic of Moldova the idea of a Holocaust is not rejected. It is a delicate topic which is delicately ignored. It's not negated. Nobody is saying there was no Holocaust. Yes, everybody says there was a Holocaust, but this phenomenon is delicately ignored, like delicately just like put under the covers by historians that promote the history of Romania, and by historians that look at Moldovan's history, which is painful to me. Yes, cultural aspects are always highlighted, but when we speak about the victims of Holocaust, they are not mentioned. And when we have the day of victims of totalitarian regimes, communist and Nazism, I think we should include there the victims of the Holocaust. And this was a proposal, but it was not approved by the parliament. The parliament did not approve it. We proposed 27th of January as a commemorating the victims of Holocaust, but the 23rd of August, which was another proposed day, was not approved by the parliament. So I propose a resolution of this conference to support the 23rd of August as a national commemoration day, so that we bring more awareness regarding this phenomenon. This is my proposal. Thank you. We have another comment here. Very short comment to your working hypothesis, because this is a logical hypothesis and explains partially, at least, what has happened in Moldova. And you heard the next commentary. Yes, the Holocaust is not negated fully, which is not entirely true. It depends who you talk to, and it depends what you talk about. You'll understand the level of negation of the Holocaust. But let's take the other point. If you start speaking concretely about the crimes that the local people participated, I mean local Basarabians, and you can test this hypothesis and you can see the reaction of people. People do not want to take accountability. Let's take one example. Pepeni village, and somebody wanted to film a documentary. The journalist was locally from Pepeni, and he took interviews with the local people, and you can see these interviews on YouTube. You can see their reaction, because we know that more than 50 local inhabitants participated in the process of massacration and killing of their own neighbors. And you will see how this hypothesis of taking accountability is basically disappearing, because the local population does not want to admit that they participated. They don't want to learn about this. They don't want to talk about this, obviously. And this is a very neuralgic point. And when you dig deep, you will be met by hostility, obviously, because people don't want to take accountability for the crimes they committed. And yes, politicians can speak about it because it's high level and the message can be, very delicately constructed. But if you go lower, if you go to the communities, and if you go and speak about concrete and real cases, you will see a strong reaction. You will see a strong reluctancy to open up about it, because people participated in it. Okay, I would like to thank you for your comments, for your working hypothesis, and I would like to close this second session based on cultures of memory. Madam Dumitru, thank you so much. Madam Hausleitner, thank you so much for your speeches and for your replies. Everything was very interesting and relevant. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Andrei Cușco and Mr. Sergiu Musteață. Please join us here in front of the room so that you can take the floor with your speeches. Bună ziua, vă salut din nou. Acum vreau să-i ofer cuvântul domnului Andrei Cușco.
In Iași.
Hello once again. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Andrei Cușco, who comes from the Institute of History de Xenopol, the Romanian Academy. He also conducted his studies in Budapest. In 2008, he achieved the PhD title, and he is an associated professor here in Chișinău in the History and Geography Department of the State University Pedagogical University Ion Creanga. He is a researcher. He is conducting a research about history of Romania, history of Basarabia, this history with symbolism, and he studies the conflicts in the 19th to 20th centuries, especially related to the Russian dimension, Romanian dimension existing on this territory. He published a number of research regarding the Second World War, and he will speak about contested nation building, antagonistic narratives, and failed transitional justice in what is the Moldovan case in the European context.
Other way around in comparison to Diana, in the sense that I will make a very short comment in English and then I will speak in Romanian, but my presentation will be in English. And I hope this would also be a bit easier for the translators. I hope that helps. Many thanks to the organizers for inviting me and for allowing me to return to my home university, let's say. Here in Chișinău, it's always very emotional for me to be here, to speak here. I would only say my last phrase in English, that the auditorium you all are sitting in today is a living embodiment of historical policy. Look at this stunning, beautiful woman, Queen Marie of Romania, who I believe I speak here for many of my fellow historians in Moldova, embodies this golden era of the interwar period to its utmost, because Queen Marie is also seen as, well, connecting Moldova, let's say, to a Romanian and a European dimension, but she always also symbolizes this dream, myth of the interwar period, which has a flimsy relationship to reality, I would say. Nevertheless, this auditorium was renamed Queen Marie, Regina Maria, only very recently, which shows you how the politics of history and the politics of memory evolved in Moldova. And really, this is my last phrase in English, the evolution of historical policy in post-independence Moldova could be embodied, I think, in three monuments. It is the story of three monuments. The monument of Tsar Alexander I, which stood in Chișinău for 4 years only, from 1914 until 1918, and it was demolished by the Romanian authorities after the union of Bessarabia with Romania. Then we have the most famous monument in Moldova, the monument to Stephen the Great, Stefan cel Mare, standing in the Central Park, the Central Garden in Chișinău, erected during the interwar period. And then we have an antagonistic narrative that I will come back to the end, Suvorov's monument in Tiraspol, which shows you that historical memory and historical policy in the Republic of Moldova is at best a contested thing. Acum, scuzați-mi.
Now I will switch to Romanian, and unfortunately the first part of my presentation was already tackled by the previous speakers. This is why I will be very brief in the first part, and I will try only to highlight or to generalize what previous speakers said in different formulations. The speakers, starting with Madam Svetlana Soveik, then continuing with Madam Diana Dumitru, and ending with Madam Mariana Hausleitner. Well, what am I speaking about? After the Declaration of Independence, I will only speak about the most recent Declaration of Independence. Beyond the well-known antagonism from the two national projects, let's call them like this, pan-Romanian and Moldovan perspective, in Republic of Moldova there was a specificity related to memory. And in the Republic of Moldova, we see applied very well Tony Jott's thesis, which was saying at some point that the intensity of memory of communism in Eastern Europe is compared to the Nazism memory in the Western Europe. And this is why there is a profound asymmetry of those two parts of the continent if we speak about culture of memory. And my colleagues brought you some examples which proves this. And even though the German Beveltium model which which functioned compared to others, even this model is no longer accepted unanimous. So not even Germany has a full application of this model. And this gives us the question: is a policy of memory, even though it's supported by the state, can this policy be longer than 3 generations or not? Because what we see is after 3 generations, the policy changes. Taking accountability for the past is no longer happening. So the history is under question after 3 generations, and the last news makes us skeptical in this sense, unfortunately.
Very shortly, I will point out 2 topics, 2 statements. One, after 1991 in Moldova, they tried, in the first 2 years, they tried a radical politics of decommunization of the public space, of changing the symbolical status of the situation when it comes to the of the memory. So this meant changing the names of streets, and not everywhere, demolishing Soviet monuments, not everywhere, because when you go to Gagauzia, you will see that this relics of communism, when it comes to street names and monuments, is still there. And this attempt to make public sphere non-communist was short-lived. Compared to Ukraine, the change of the names of the streets did not generate an important debate, which showed that most of the population did not resonate with these new names. Most of the urban population from Chișinău in the 90s, these names, which were Romanian names, were, well, they were indifferent to them. It was indifferent for them. The second point is that at the middle of the 90s, there was a trade-off by default. A very fine balance between political elites, which had a very ambiguous discourse about national identity, and before 2001, but specifically after 2001, it was about implementing the Moldovan project, and intellectual elites, historians specifically, who were advocating for the Romanian discourse. So this trade-off was interrupted by the party of communists, the communist government. The communist government tried to implement a historical, much more radical policy, but they failed. They would make the 2 camps even more further apart. They failed to change the balance in the academia and in education sphere. The next stage, which changed or tried to change without too much success the situation, refers to the, I would call it, experiment, which was undertaken after the party of communists was ousted, when the new pro-European coalition declared pro-European coalition, using certain models or patterns which functioned in certain countries. I talk about the Mariana Commission from Romania, but also some memory trends in Ukraine under Yushchenko. They tried to an anti-communist memory. And here in this room we have at least 4 members of this committee, including the 2 of us who are in the panel. When I talk about Gimpu committee or commission, I speak as the one who was on it. Well, it failed actually, this committee. I don't know if you agree with me, Sergiu. You agree, right? But because it was an attempt to transfer some original models to the context of Moldova, and because long-term, even though politically it didn't have the impact, actually it didn't have an impact at all, well, academically, it meant the first step towards opening the archives and initiating a relatively consistent debate about the communist past. What is happening in this area today is a consequence of the hole or the void that was left by this committee. So, as you may see from the proper presentation, the failure of the Gimpu Commission, the so-called or Kojokaru Commission, according to the chairman of the commission, it failed because of objective reasons to a large extent. It didn't have the necessary resources, it didn't have the political support, and it was never created into a permanent or long-standing institution. The effort of transitional justice, if we were to take this effort as a model, or compare it to the models that functioned in other contexts in Southern Africa, or this Mariana committee from Romania, well, this committee never lived up to the people's expectations, but it couldn't, because to a big extent it was the result of a very specific political conjuncture. Anyway, I should also say that the repercussions of this committee's work in the first years of its activity were quite interesting, and one could feel them, because they tried a number of legal initiatives to regulate the memory of Nazism and communism. I talk about the legal initiative from July 2012, which was to ban the symbols of the Nazi and communist regimes. But it was clear that this law refers more to the communist symbols, not to the Nazi ones. The Nazi ones were very secondary for the parliament. So this initiative failed again, and in 2015, in a different situation, they even cancelled it. The parliament cancelled it. The Constitutional Court cancelled it, and then the parliament had to accept this decision. So, after 2015, the politics of memory and historical politics in Moldova entered in a shadow, into some shadows, but still you have this clear difference, antagonistic views, when you talk about the Transnistrian memory. Using this term, I understand that this is also an object of the politics of memory in 2024, September. The leadership of Transnistria adopted, well, the so-called parliament, adopted a law where the name of Transnistria is deemed to be, is banned actually. They said that this is a consequence of the Nazi regime. And then there are very fiery debates about the significance of this legal measure in the context of the war against Ukraine. It's about radicalization of the politics of the memory. But what I'm trying to say here is that this politics of Transnistrian memory in the so-called Transnistrian Moldovan Republic is also a mirror of the politics of memory of Moldova, independent after 1991. Because, as you may well see, these fundamental elements of the collective memory and of the Transnistrian identity, which include the Soviet multi-ethnicity and the antagonism against the Western values, and in quite a specific interpretation of Moldovanism, and a focus on the Russian world and belonging to the Russian world, allowed the Tiraspol regime to build quite a coherent narrative for the self-identification. But this persistence, both of the unrecognized state and as well as of the narratives which legitimize it, when it comes to the reconciliation in Moldova, well, it actually fails to do it. So you have this narrative, which of course has followers which are not only in Transnistria. And to conclude, I should say that this radicalization of the memory of politics of memory in the unrecognized republic from 2014, in the context of the first phase of the war of Russia against Ukraine, before the full-fledged war, this politics of memory was fueled by elements related to the narrative of the Russian world and the belonging of this region to the Novorossiya. And that again shows that in the last 10 years in Moldova, we had a radicalization of the antagonism. In Transnistria, there is a radicalization of the discourse. So all of that make us be again very skeptical about a possible dialogue between the two entities, let alone talking about a possible reintegration in the EU, ever. Thank you so much, and apologies for that I talked beyond the agenda. Thank you. Right. I welcome Sergiu Musteață, who again studied history in Chișinău at the Pedagogical State University. He also studied law at the State University of Moldova, and he has his PhD in Iași, and then he came back to Chișinău, and from 2015 he teaches history at the history department at the Pedagogical University in Chișinău. He was the dean of this faculty, and he has a number of publications, various publications, and numerous publications. He has research in the area of the cultural heritage, which is reflected also in history books. So he also has researches in when it comes to teaching history. Thank you so much, Mr. Volkmer, for this possibility to speak about it. Thank you for this opportunity to come back home. I'd like to thank colleagues as well. So my predecessors made our jobs easier when it comes to the culture of memory. And Andrei also pointed it out rightly, some components. It's a big topic with many aspects, with many subtleties, and with many risks, and with many hideouts. So let me just fill in what Andrei said and to comment. So oftentimes there is speculations when you talk about the movements from the time of restructuring. We go into a different area, national area, and we give this emancipation movement, too much credit. But they organized the restructuring in the Gorbachev era. It's weird to look at the map of Bessarabia with the Gorbachev portrait at the time. So these were the times, and things got mixed up. So the issue, the wish to call things for what they are, that moved the reality into a different direction, and the linguistic component was essential, which is to bring back home the opportunity to speak and write Romanian, even though they call it Moldovan. And in the law at the time, we had this movement of unification of Moldovans, which was separate when the unionistic discourse started. In the 90s, the language did not unify the people of Bessarabia, but actually it separated them, and it continues to be so. Even though the Constitutional Court has legalized and brought Romanian language into the Constitution of Moldova, many in this society still believe that it's Moldova and the language is Moldovan. So you have then the historical component, which is abused and speculated and turned into a propaganda tool in the Soviet period of time. So today the population, and my predecessor said, the population is in that Soviet discourse updated because of the Russian propaganda, which didn't change anything, didn't invent anything new. It actually refocused slightly, and that they talked about the World War II and the victory in it, bringing back the old name, the Great Patriotic War, against a generally accepted notion. So today, this is still valid. In the Soviet period, this caricature talks a lot. So are we talking about real things or what is written in the manuals? So today this is valid in Moldova. If we talk about those sensitive components of a history full of victims, be it about Holocaust or the extermination of Roma or other aspects of deportation, and oftentimes Moldova tries to recover to what was forbidden or people didn't want to talk about, extermination of layers of society. In 1991, when the USSR disintegrated, a number of decisions were taken which didn't last. The condemnation of the communist regime was produced in 1991. The Party of Communists of the Soviet Union was outlawed. I mean, the branch in Moldova. But it didn't take long. It came back. And in 1994, they transformed themselves. They called themselves Agrarian Party, and they lead Moldova under the same communist umbrella. Another decision, when we talk about the politics of memory, is about the attitude and our relation to the symbols and the monuments, which are a key element of political regimes. In this case, it's the communist regime. In August 1991, the parliament, actually the plenum of the parliament, because it was not the full parliament, but just the management of the parliament, actually, they say that they should liquidate the monuments and other attributes and symbols of the communism. Now, when it comes to relations in the past, liquidation doesn't mean to solve the problem. History cannot be deleted. You cannot delete what belongs to you. Actually, we shift the focus and put them in the museum. Anyway, Svetlana said it, and we didn't solve a problem by attempting to delete from this public sphere. Many monuments are still here. Other changed the location, but some were transferred in their private sphere. some people put them in their courtyard. They said, why? They say they keep it for their children. They don't even know who Lenin is. Well, they put them in their own courtyard and they save it for the next generations. In this case, in this period of communists coming back between 2001 and 2009, they said that they wanted to recover, and they tried to introduce into the list of the monuments protected by the state. They wanted to introduce the communist monuments. Well, we don't talk about their architectural or aesthetical value. It's the symbol that matters. So there was a debate in the parliament. They didn't do it, but then they voted a law about the public monuments, and they are there in that list. So when it comes to the public monuments dedicated to the World War II, also there's a fight between the symbols, attitudes, and perceptions. If some monuments were their heads were chopped off, and then others were reintegrated into the public discourse, and they put them back into the so-called eternity complex. This was the place where they put back the monuments in Chișinău, with millions of investments pouring in from Moscow. In 2009, they invited the directors of the Institutes of History from the CIS in Moscow to a meeting at the auspices of the Institute of Universal History, organized by Lavrov in a very protected area. I thought there's more security officers than participants, but that's Russia. And we were told what we need to do next year. So I told the Russian academician. They say I said it's Second World War, but the Russians wanted us to call it Great Patriotic War. And I disagreed. They said that, well, this is the wish of our president. We should call it Great Patriotic War. They were upset with me and never invited me to Moscow. So talk about a phenomenon the wars of memory, or the memory of wars. And a lot of people in this regard, they are in a dilemma. How to put the focus is better in our relations with the First World War, World War I, or World War II, which is even more painful. I have a slide which explains that. We don't know how to tackle our values. We don't have symbols which represent us. The currency reform, or the national currency introduced in '93 in Moldova, says a lot. Look at the 10 differences between the Russian ruble and the Moldovan leu, at the design level, at the color level, at the dimension level, size level. The Russian ruble of 1, it cannot be differentiated with the Moldovan leu, including 5 and 10. And then there is another thing. In the Soviet time, they built these symbolic elements. Lenin was everywhere. Well, now it's Stefan Chilamaria who is everywhere. But we didn't solve a very important problem, our relation with the past and the values that we commit to and which represent us, and the culture of memory and the perception towards the past. Now, when it comes to the committee, Andrei was right to point out, and I fully agree, this was a collapse, a failure, because this was a very good decision initially, but it was a political one. So we had some restrictive terms, restricted by the next elections. The politicians at the time, neither Gimpo nor his entourage, they didn't talk about a sustainable perspective of a committee, of an institution aimed at research, which should reveal, as it was called, research and evaluation of the totalitarian communist regime in Moldova, not conviction. Conviction is a legal term, and it has actually the matter of the courts to do it. So the history shows the reality. So unfortunately, under 6 months was not enough. But we made the revolution of the archives. We reactivated the committee to declassification committee, and from then on, the committee declassifies as a result of the activity of the committee. They've opened the access to 99% of the archive of the former party. Communist Party of Moldova. It is accessible to everyone, except for some cases, but those were personal cases of the party activists. So not only one could enter, but they transferred from the special storage of the intelligence service, the former KGB archive, a couple of thousands of cases about the terror from the 30s in Transnistria and deportations from the RSSM. They have also transferred from the archive of the Ministry of Internal Affairs some 1,000 cases about deportations. We discovered that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there are 2 archives, one official, one unofficial, or the archive of the prosecution, or the archive of archives of courts and other things. And we progressed when it comes to access to archives. But it was never institutionalized, and that was an impediment to support what Andrei said. The collapse of the committee, until today, they didn't publish the report of this committee. Those 30 members worked. We wrote 1,000 pages. None was published. They organized a conference, and we published something, but no. The committee was stirred the attention of the society. This committee was called the committee is provoking a civil war in Moldova. Fear about the truth about the totalitarian regime. The Party of Communists, headed by Voronin, was afraid that they will be outlawed again. And the example of banning symbols is one more proof to this. They challenged this at the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court said that it's anti-constitutional to convict the symbols of communism, and they could not put them on the same scale with the Nazi symbols. Now, there was a conference organized, one international one, with many people coming. What the Party of Communists did, second day of the conference, they protested against the activity of an academic committee. And they clearly told us that if we talk about communism from an anti-communist perspective, then we are fascists. Fascists. This is the element and the attitude of a component of the Moldovan society who doesn't want to criticize, and they don't want to commit to the past either. So this committee was deemed as a political committee or a committee of revenge, retaliation against the Party of Communists. It was not taken seriously by the other part of the society, which is more leftist or pro-Russian. And I end here because a lot of things to say. In the same year, June 28th, through presidential decree, was declared that he declared 28 June 1940 the day of the occupation of Bessarabia. Nothing new under the sun. It's a day that people knew about, and it was in some laws already. Communists challenged that, and they declared it anti-constitutional. Anti-constitutional means that this is a political decision, because we have the law on the victims of the communist regime or deportations, where clearly states Soviet occupation. There's government decrees on rehabilitation, on damages to be paid, and other matters, which clearly stays. Actually, that in the same year, in front of the government, Andrei talked about the monument to the king. There's a place there in front of the government where there's a clash of politics of memory. After the moment of King, you have Ferdinand. After Ferdinand, you have Stalin, and then Lenin. And then there's a stone which talks about the memory, which was attacked, and the pro-Russians, they said that this is the stone of shame. If you talk about the victims of communism, it's a shame for many in the Moldovan society, which means that education lacks, about history and the responsible attitude towards the past. The stone is still there. It was vandalized a couple of times. They put paint on it, but going forward, the discourse about identity is a sensitive one. Politicians speculate, but never looked for a solution to reconciliation, which means a balanced approach of our identity, belonging. So we are in these two camps, which clash from time to time. When some provoke them, some say that they are Romanians and they speak Romanian. Others still insist that they are Moldovans and they talk Moldovan. But I don't think that they fully understand the complexity of this approach. Rather, it's politicized. That's why our belonging to the motherland, some of the people of Moldova, they are citizens of 3 or 4 countries. They have 3 or 4 passports. We have a law which allows us double citizenship, but actually they exceeded themselves. They went beyond themselves because the people have Bulgarian, Russian, Romanian, Turkish. So have people with 3 or 4 citizenships. Transnistrians have 5 passports.
In this context, this is another topic of accepting the reality and checking the past. Some people recognize themselves in a country that is called the Republic of Moldova, whilst others still name Moldova as Basarabia, and they see the place of Basarabia united to Romania. And then there's another group of people that would like to rehabilitate the Soviet Union because their homeland is the Soviet Union. And everything happened until 2014. The pro-Russian speech was present everywhere because they were preparing 2014 with Nova Russia. In the south of Basarabia, there was under preparation a secession, autonomous region like Donetsk and Lugansk. As you know, that region, Gagauzia, organized their local congress, but somehow the situation did not allow for such a cessation. And the Russian propaganda is still felt a lot in that region and in the remaining of Moldova. I look at the data. I took the data from December 2018. Over 49% of the population regrets the dissolution of the Soviet Union and considers that the Soviet Union was the most perfect. And we're not talking about nostalgia. We're talking about fueling that memory in order to keep control and domination over that region from the Russian forces. And obviously, if they are going to maintain this influence, they will achieve good results. Let's see who are the most popular historical personalities. First is Ștefan cel Mare, Stephen the Great, and the second is Vladimir Putin. You can see. By the way, the first introducing restrictive measures regarding Russia was Stephen the Great, and he started that effort back in 1400, and he had more courage. And the attempt of Communist Party to create this national policy for the Republic of Moldova failed. So the creation of this national policy started with the wrong step, wrong leg. They tried to fortify a statality. For example, in 2009 there was an attempt to celebrate the statehood which was absurd, and they promoted an antagony between the Romanian language, Moldovan language, and all together proves the blindness towards the diversity of the Moldovan society. And because they had this blindness, they never managed to create the national policy concept of the Republic of Moldova. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This was a very good synthesis of the first half of the day. We heard wonderful ideas. We heard key elements. We heard a lot of ideas. We heard comments from the public. Unfortunately, we don't have more time to start a Q&A, but let's ask you, if you agree to reduce the time allocated for the lunch break, then we can take more questions and replies. So let's see, any questions from the audience? And if you agree to shorten the lunch break, we can take your questions. Hello once again. Thank you so much for organizing this conference. The speeches were impressive and I feel like we can speak for hours. But I have two short questions and they refer partially to the first discussion. Concretely, what changed after the invasion of Russia in Ukraine? What changed in Moldova? Has this invasion contributed to positive progress, evolution here in Moldova? And my second question, what are the concrete actors that contribute to formulate the culture of memory? Maybe there are new actors that we need to keep in mind. For example, speaking about Czech Republic, they have anti-complex organization, and this is a body, an entity that deals with this topic so that they don't promote extremism, nationalism. And do you have such actors present in Moldova? And who is promoting the research and eloquent speech regarding the Holocaust in Moldova? Can you let us know, please? Thank you so much for your panels. And thank you for your speeches. I'm also a historian, and I would like to say that it took dozens of years in Austria until we were ready to speak about the involvement of Austria in the Holocaust and the participation of Austria in the Nazism movement. And Austria took accountability very late in this, and here we have to clarify two things. If we speak about the politics of memory, we should launch discussions on the topic of Holocaust. And we noticed that this model was tackled by the previous panel. They spoke about the German model and were their approach. But the current generation doesn't agree with this model. And looking at the current events, with what happened in the Middle East, what happened in October, it is a greater challenge. And so these events make us to come back and study the past. What are our approach towards migrant communities? What is our approach towards displaced people? I think we understand we need to have another approach towards the Jewish community, towards people that promotes the interests of this community. And I think that this is important to check. What is the attitude of Moldova and Romania in this sense? If we look at the efforts of promoting Europe, I would say that we can name here the Council of Europe. they are tackling a number of topics, including clarifying history facts. And here we speak about multiple countries from Europe that are united in this sense. They would like to promote an accurate history. And we can also mention here multiple tools and how these topics are used as a tool, as leverage. There are multiple exchange of experiences in order to clarify these historical events. In my opinion, the Council of Europe should take an important role, and other institutions are not needed to be created. We can just clarify and promote more clarity. Okay. Let's ask Mr. Cușcos. Thank you so much for the question. I will reply very brief. First question regarding the impact of the Russian war in Ukraine, which started in 2022. In the sector of policy of memories, maybe Sergiu can correct me here, I have not seen crucial initiatives that are launched in order to change things, because the current government is mostly interested to combat disinformation, to combat these fake news sources, to combat foreign propaganda initiatives coming from Kremlin. And I think that this is where the most tangible results were achieved. For example, some sites were forbidden, or some TV stations were reprimanded for just disseminating Russian propaganda. And I think even though this comes from a positive intention, and even though this is a measure that could change the situation 20 years ago, now I see these measures as too little too late. It's not enough to restrict a TV station, because we have the social media, and restricting a TV station leads to almost no result. Even more, this is promoted as an example of censorship, and this there are some restrictions of media in Russian language, but as we know, the social media is very powerful. From this point of view, what I've noticed was what happened immediately after the invasion in Ukraine, during the hot period of this invasion. What happened? We saw a distancing of one layer of society, and they started rejecting the Russian narrative. But this distancing was not complete and not full, because as we know, there is a great uncertainty. What should be the position of the society towards this war? Why? Because there are a number of minorities. There is a minority which is very vocal anti-Putin. There's another minority which takes the position pro-Putin or pro-Russia. And then there is the, I don't want to use radical terms, which is inadequate, coming from the French Revolution, called the muddy waters. But this includes a majority which is waiting. It's waiting or is fully confused. They don't know what position to take. And speaking about the second question, I don't have a reply, because I recognize I've never monitored the grassroots initiative from Moldova. What appeared in the last 2 years, or the civil society actors are not very interested to study the politics of memory, or to tackle the memories. And as we know, this is the hegemony of the academia, and unfortunately I didn't tackle the academia, but what I've seen is that the predominant is the nationalistic perspective, and we can see this in the History Museum in Chișinău. We have their idealization of the interbellic period. There is a focus on deportation, minimizing, or if not totally denying or ignoring Holocaust, and we continue to see this narrative which was crystallized in the middle of the 90s and continues in the same way. Partially was adjusted, but it was not revised and it was not made appropriate, in my opinion. Sergiu? Yes, I would like to comment. Certainly the war in Ukraine changed the paradigm and changed the perception of Moldovan citizens, especially after 2022. But let's not negate the fact that this change of mind started in 2014, even though the society is still pretty divided, who is pro and who is against. Some people changed their mind, others still wait in the kitchen to be elaborated by Putin, especially Transnistrian region. But also, let's not neglect the fact that many Moldovans from Moldova are still waiting for Putin, or they're waiting for a great change. There is even now a joke. You want my opinion? Let's meet again after the presidential election, which include the referendum question. So this means that things in Moldova are still unsecure. People are tense, speaking about the interests of Russia in Moldova. Let's talk about the relation with Ukraine. Officially, is very good, and it's based on managing displaced people and refugees, support, indirect and direct support to overcome the war consequences, but no, it has not reached the level of speaking about the memory. Yes, there are some discussions regarding the attitude of Ukraine towards the Romanian minority living in Ukraine. Yeah, we have not discussed it fully, but there is this desire in the community, in the population, that there is a desire to have permission to study in Romanian, to study for the Romanian minority to study the memory, the history, and I see very few organizations that promote a policy of memory, what it means to have a responsibility and take accountability for the past. And I think it's a lack of political accountability regarding the past. And of course, if there are some NGOs which have a community of historians, they might tackle this approach. And we see some presentations and discussions in the public area, but we don't see a national plan which aims to cover the entire territory to speak about elements of memory. So now coming to your question to Council of Europe, I was involved in multiple activities implemented by the Council of Europe as a participant, as observer. I think that compared to what happened prior to 2000 or 2010, Council of Europe paid attention to a lot of historical education. For example, what is the right history? They involved the National Institute from Braunschweig to analyze the history textbook from 2001 to 2006, when the history of Romania was removed and it was introduced, the course integrated history. So people tried, but back then it was created the impression that the Council of Europe wanted to calm down the spirits of Moldova, because Moldova had to take the chair of the Council of Europe, and because they wanted to have less conflicts, which is rarely, they gave some money, but just to comment, not to the right people. Government representatives spent 200,000 euros to create a center which was never created. It was the funds were consumed, but the center never appeared. And today, the Council of Europe launched a project, which is another attempt under the umbrella of another project, but adding a participation tax discourages Moldova to be a fully fledged member. For 2 years, we are observer, we lobby to the government to give us the money, and we are told there is no money. But we know that this reply is not the full picture. There's no desire. Ukraine was accepted because France paid for the membership fee. Somehow Moldova has not identified a sponsor to cover the 15,000 euros per year. The government sent a lot of letters, a lot of requests, but still no money. So far, we have not managed to convince the Ministry of Education to find the money so that we are full members of the observer, who not only provides oversight but facilitates the discussions between historical committee from all the EU space, so that there is a tolerant approach towards the history facts. I spoke with Goethe Institute regarding the successful attempts to create a textbook for Germany-France, or France-Germany if you don't want to upset anyone, and a joint textbook for Germany and Poland. They analyzed the curriculum, they committed some proposals, and they created some draft for textbooks. But we said that for Moldova and Romania it's easier because we speak the same language, but there was no support. So ministers from Bucharest and Chișinău do not understand each other, then there's no progress in this sense. Okay, let's see. Last question, please. Thank you so much. I would like to ask Mr. Cușco. You spoke about what is the role of historians, professional historians in the Republic of Moldova, and I have a question in this sense. What is the place of professional historians in the narrative regarding Transnistria, and if there's a conflict here between the separatist administration and their narrative versus the narrative of professional historians? I will reply in 2 minutes, and I would like to come back to the comments of a professor regarding the mnemonic consensus and regarding the fact that the demographic changes and the forced migration which happened basically cancelled the mnemonic memory concept. Why? Because the Holocaust as main experience, as a phenomenon of this Western European memory was somewhat under question because there are many more Muslim migrants, and it also was questioned because of the Eastern European experience. Now, since 2022, we have anti-Russian and anti-Soviet opinions was much more discussed, was brought in much more radically than prior to 2022. This was the second source. So we have 2 sources which lead to this approach. So the forced migration, more and more Muslim, and the Eastern European opinion. And this leads to no longer this asymmetry, and this cannot support that opinion which was viable for 50 years. Now things are changing. And now to reply to your question, there's no conflict between the Tiraspol administration and professional historian, but there is a discussion between the historian from Transnistria. I didn't mention the Transnistrian History Lab from Yabarunga, and they took creatively a lot of elements from the Soviet narrative, but at the same time they managed to keep a balance regarding their opponents. So they presented the history of the region. For example, 12th of October 1924, 3 days ago, by the way, we had a conference on this day, which is the day of creating this territory. And this is the creation of Transnistria's statehood. And on the other hand, we have the separatist republic, which must be integrated in the region. And Volkova, on the other hand, which was the opponent of Babylunga, and she was supported by the Transnistrian administration, in her opinion, she has, I can't find the right word, she has a centrist opposition regarding the current territory, and she's trying to prove, by the way, to the absurd, but very interesting and very creative, she's trying to prove that this Soviet Republic of Moldova was just a project, and they did not manage to control anything on this territory, not even the wagons. So this could be the proto-statehood Transnistrian. So there's these fights for academic hegemony, for the right vision, for the dominant explanation of Transnistria that supports the statehood. Thank you so much. Any other opinion, any other questions? So I would say we started the day very well with a lot of good presentations. And now it's time to have the lunch break, and we will see each other at 2 o'clock.